Christian Parreno is an assistant professor of history and theory of architecture at Universidad San Francisco de Quito. His research focus is on conditions of boredom and sameness in the modern built environment with an emphasis on experience. His writings have appeared in several journals and edited volumes, and he's also the author of the book Boredom, Architecture and Spatial Experience, which was published by Bloomsbury in 2021, as well as obviously the editor of the volume we just heard about. Yeah.
By the end of The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, Stephen Elliott's cult film from 1994, its three protagonists in full drag regalia ascend Kings Canyon, a landmark in the Australian outback. Despite having achieved a long-held fantasy, Bernadette, Mitzi, and Felicia appear bored. After encountering all that space, they simply want to go home. The next one, please, and it is a video.
I had a dream. Well, we did it. It never ends, does it? All that space. So what now?
I think I want to go home.
Me too. Well then, let's finish the shows and go home.
Great. Next slide, please. So their boredom stems from a nostalgia of home. But home cannot be traditional nor illusory. For them, a transgender woman and two gay men, home is not an architecture of static buildings and traditions. Rather, their sense of belonging unfolds within a moving body, a bus christened Priscilla. This duality of social estrangement and the search for the most genuine abode to dwell resonates with Martin Heidegger's elaborations on boredom as a defining symptom of modernity. Although Heidegger notably left the body out of his philosophy, this paper explores its significance, the significance of the body, through the bodies in the adventures of Priscilla. It examines the relationship between inhabitation, architecture, and individual becoming, with boredom and homesickness as preconditions or catalysts for envisioning authentic lifestyles and their special configurations. Next slide, please. So, with excuse of a commitment for a series of performance, Bernadette, Tick, and Adam embark on a 2,800-kilometer journey from Sydney to Alice Springs. Their means of transportation, a 1976 Hino bus acquired by Adam with funds from his mother, becomes their home. The bus is originally empty and in precarious mechanical conditions. Its architecture begins a process of transformation as soon as it is named Priscilla, an act of shifting from the generic to the unique. Inside, Priscilla offers zones for driving, everyday living, and drag. The front includes the driver's seat, a hanger for costumes, an armchair, and two daybeds, as an area for living and resting, part lounge and part bedroom for Chick and Bernadette. The next one, please. Below, in the luggage compartment, Adam's sleeping area doubles as his tanning booth. The next one, please. The rear permits the production of drag, with wigs and their stands, mirrors and lights for makeup, even a sewing station if needed for mending or fashion creativity. It also includes a kitchen that is mostly used as a cocktail bar, with chairs, a small table, and a divan with panoramic views. These spaces are defined by the activities they accommodate, but they are not arranged through abstract functionalism. Instead, they maximize their inhabitation possibilities by being multifaceted and flexible, incorporating and celebrating the practices that make the protagonists their authentic selves. The next one, please. The bus's rugged exterior extends this adaptability. It becomes a stage for performance. During an extended period of driving, Adam, as Felicia, lip syncs Sempre Libera, an aria from Verdi's La Traviata, sat on a prop in the shape of a high heel in a colossal attire. The visual, spatial, and musical spectacle is achievable due to the movement that Priscilla offers as a motorized body. This display, created in total liberty and solely for the amusement of Adam and Tig, and to the annoyance of Bernadette, is all the more theatrical against the deceptive bareness of the desert and the monotony of driving. The road and Priscilla coalesce to stimulate spatial and emotional relations of distance and proximity, movement and stasis, direction and intention that connect the bodies and experiences of Adam, Tig, and Bernadette, converging into an architecture of belonging. Next one, please. The busyness of these characters, their incapacity of stillness and frantic attempts to change their surroundings, is essentially modern. Heidegger observes that the accelerated tempo of modernity is replete with distractions that pass the time, but hinder closeness with one's own the same, our authentic existence within the world. In a series of lectures of 1929-1930, later published as the Fundamental Concepts of Metaphysics, Heidegger identifies boredom as a complex condition that exposes and affects the experience of existing in this era. Boredom is evident not only in the reigning culture of agitation, driven by capitalist economies that require constant production and the accrual of wealth, but also in their understanding of space as infinite and neutral, evident in positivist thought. The next one, please. Modern boredom is pervasive. Heidegger says, must we first make ourselves interesting to ourselves again? Why must we do this? Perhaps because ourselves have become bored with ourselves. Do things ultimately stand in such a way with us that a profound boredom draws back and forth like a silent fog in the abysses of the sea? Heidegger prescribes philosophy to regain authenticity. To him, philosophy is philosophizing, which entails a process of questioning, reflection, and action, a flow of information between interiority, the space of sentiments and thoughts, and exteriority, the space of the body. Next one, please. The interrelation between these realms incites the search for home, since philosophy begins with homesickness, an urge to be at home everywhere. The modern individual is insidiously out of home, and being out of home needs to be acknowledged so it can be resolved. To be at home everywhere, Heidegger asserts, means to be at once and at all times within the whole. The whole is the world, and the world is home. Instead of being at home, the modern individual is caught in endless transitions, always desiring a next phase of fulfillment. Home cannot be fixed, for the relationship with the world fluctuates through one's own history and, by extension, so do the characteristics of home. Although buildings produce spaces that can become home, such condition cannot always derive from fixed architecture. It is movement, rather, what determines engagement, being away from home, being close to home, being at home. In modernity, boredom is a fundamental mood, symptom of homesickness as well as a detestable reminder of human mortality. The slow passing of time in boredom confronts the accelerated body, perpetuating a cycle of diversion and exhaustion that cannot offer any significance. Instead of avoiding boredom, Heidegger, who regarded the body as the most difficult philosophical problem, but refrained from elaborating on its capacities or participation in modernity, recommends recognizing its presence, initiating a moment of awakening that could lead to the identification of an authentic home, physical and ontological. In this quest, the body is always present, receiving and processing information from interiority while at the same time creating and coloring relationships with the world. This exchange questions the state of the body, the health of the body, as a defining factor in inhabitation. Kevin Ahu, in his exploration of Heidegger's neglect of the body, observes that corporeality passes unnoticed when in well-being, not as an abstraction, but as another component of the environment. In everyday practices, the body withdraws from attention. But when in illness, it manifests, not only through idleness and restlessness, but also as physiological failures that obstruct the flow with surrounding events. If boredom prevails in modernity as a chronic condition, then it renders the modern body as vulnerable to illness. To be modern is to be bored, and to be bored is to be out of home, in a state of malady. Boredom unveils disconnection with the world and simultaneously exposes the desire to engage with the whole. Next one, please. Although boredom attunes the body with the realm above the physical in a moment of in-betweenness, it is dependent on the environment, since it is triggered by it. Heidegger affirms boredom is a hybrid, partly objective, partly subjective, with three levels of intensity all present in the adventures of Priscilla. Next one, please. The most basic typology of boredom occurs when one becomes bored by something, in a circumstance. In the film, this superficial boredom prompts the trio to leave Sydney, exhausted by repetitive performances, familial tensions, and personal grief. Tick, Adam, and Bernadette are over and underwhelmed by Sydney and his routines, as if Sydney were withholding itself from them, or as if they could no longer find themselves enthused by its offerings. The only end to become bored by something is to alter the eliciting situation. Adam captures this boredom in a song while packing. A desert holiday. Let's pack the drag away. You take the lunch and tea, I'll take the ecstasy. Fuck off, you silly queer. I'm getting out of here. Next one, please. The second typology of boredom is being bored with something. It requires an examination, in hindsight, of a situation that might have not been acknowledged as boring while it was occurring. This boredom propagates without needing to be tied to what was boring, as in a dinner party that only becomes boring when, upon returning home, one realizes that the evening was trivial. Adam's last interaction in Broken Hill suggests such an apprehension. The stay in the rural town was eventful, including a stroll along the main street in drag and Bernadette's victory in a drinking challenge with a local resident. But when, the next morning, Priscilla appears vandalized with the homophobic graffiti, "AIDS fuckers go home," the mood turns somber, as if all the social advancements they thought have gained by being there, sharing with the community, had been lost, false, or simply imagined. Mitzi, Felicia, and Bernadette were not bored by Broken Hill, but with themselves in Broken Hill. The environment delivered its offerings with precision, and the passing of time was not slowed. Nonetheless, as Heidegger says, the subsequence of nows became a single stretched now, which did not flow but stood. The next one, please. The third typology of boredom constitutes it is boring for one, and is omnipresent, as when walking through the streets of a large city on a Sunday afternoon, Heidegger says. The environment is calm and quiet. It is not annoying, but simply is. The it of it is boring, it is the same it as in it is thundering or it is raining, revealing its universality. When Mitzi, Felicia, and Bernadette reach the top of Kings Canyon, they confront all that space. Far from being abstract, the emptiness of the desert had provided the detachment required to turn to life critically, with the ability to discern what is needed and what is lacking. Boredom presents a way of the modern world to make itself manifest, of communicating the very possibilities of doing and being. For Heidegger, one liberates oneself by disclosing oneself to oneself amidst the specificity of the world. This self-disclosure is a moment of vision, a resynchronization with the whole that unveils whether one either is or needs to be at all. The next one, please. The driving of Priscilla is hazy but eventful, stopping at different locations. The Simpson Desert, Broken Hill, Cooper Pedy, Alice Springs, Kings Canyon, as if these had been required stages in the passing from one state of consciousness to another, from deep sleep to total alertness. To Heidegger, this enlightenment is paradoxical. The modern conditions that produce and perpetuate boredom, including social inequality, political confusion, the powerlessness of science, the erosion of art, the groundlessness of philosophy, and the impotence of religion, are precisely what could acknowledge ontological homelessness and its eventual redemption. In the process of identifying values and beliefs of existential affirmation, architecture can become an enabler and connector with the world. It ought to rouse philosophical questioning rather than scientific clarity. The aim, following Hyder, would be to regain mystery and inner pressure. The architecture of our Priscilla is improvised, embedded in humor and shaped by the banality of daily needs. Its textures, colors, and mobility resist grand designs and fetishize notions of home. Priscilla, in its movement and multiplicity, becomes a body that connects other, a home that is always in flux, an affirmation of becoming, and a camp rebellion that begins in boredom, fights against it, and eventually returns to it unavoidably. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. Thank you so much. Any questions from our audience? Otherwise, I was going to maybe ask a little bit more. I think I found that connection between homelessness or a longing for a home and boredom quite interesting, because I suppose, if we think about boredom as, like a desire for something else, and maybe homelessness being a desire for home, maybe there's a certain parallel. On the other hand, I feel like a lot of people feel that like being home, like home can also be sort of like a negative thing, something that, like you want to get away from. Like in this case, they want to get away from Sydney because it's getting boring. Don't know if you want to sort of talk about that a bit more, like those sort of like pulling in different directions, the idea of home and boredom.
Yes, I think that it is a very interesting observation because, of course, it's the question of what is home or and how can we define home. Uh, so I think that on the one hand, when one is bored out of home, the first thought that we tend to have is, I want to go home. I want to get rid of this unwanted circumstance and I want to go home. But of course, home can also produce boredom, just being at home. And perhaps here is what Heidegger begins to suggest, that if one is bored, then one is out of home. So the physical home that is producing boredom is not really your home. Something is missing, something is lacking, and therefore one has to actively look for that home, search for that home, search for that uh, 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 home in physical terms, in architectural terms, but also in ontological terms. So it becomes a question of a calibration between what we can say the physical architecture and the architecture of inhabitation. So, so boredom, yes, problematizes this idea of not only what is the architecture of home, but also what is the architecture of ontological.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. That was a really good answer, I think. Any other questions in the audience, or has everyone sort of reached their brain capacity for the day? Nothing else? I think I was going to ask about, oh, I think Julian's got something. Julian, do you want to go?
Sure. I think it's interesting that you choose a movie that focuses around a bus. And there's a lot of literature on boredom in relation to trains, for example, the relationship between the inside and the outside, the way that the train moves, but we don't really experience the outside. And so the train changes the very perception of how people relate to traveling through space. And I'm wondering if that was part of your consideration in terms of this movie and analyzing the character's relationship to the bus.
Um, I think, in a way, uh, perhaps from an architectural point of view, what I'm trying also to highlight through the idea of movement is the kind of preconceived idea that architecture or that meaningful architecture needs to be static. And And of course, on the one hand, architecture cannot move, does not move. It goes against the principles of architecture. A building has to be stable, a building has to stand. But it also carries all these social connotations. And when one does not fulfill those social connotations, the, the act of being within an architectural space, the act of inhabitation becomes not only problematic, because of course those spaces were created for very specific, let's say, social assumptions, but also can become, like perhaps that's what I'm trying to say with the movie, become an act of rebellion. So by going against the principle of stasis of architecture and by inhabiting a moving body, as if it would be a moving building, then the act of boredom, the act of being bored and inhabiting this boredom that enforces this movement, this displacement, this condition of being from one space to another, becomes slightly less passive, and I think boredom becomes way much more active.
I think I was going to just mention one other thing, just on the back of the talk we had was it this morning, this afternoon, where we were talking about boredom and nature. I don't know if you were around for that question at the time. It was basically, I think it was Weinand's talk, that was sort of looking at, like how nature is maybe perceived as something that, can alleviate boredom, or at least, the cityscapes may boredom may be potentially worse. I'm wondering if there's I have to admit, I haven't actually seen the film myself, which is really embarrassing as a queer person, but uh, I'm wondering if that somehow, like, does that play into it? I mean, I feel like deserts are boring, so does that mean that it's the type of nature that isn't really good against boredom?
Um, yes, actually, there is a very close relationship between boredom and the driving and the movie, because first of all, it's a very long drive, and it's a long drive through a desert, which is in theory something that we tend to assume that has absolutely nothing. And also is the act of driving, which is, a very, very long drive, through a very, let's say, uneventful landscape, can be extremely boring. But throughout this trajectory, is that they keep encountering not only different towns, not only different architectures with different societies, but also even within the desert, they begin to discover different things. They have encounters with native people, etc. So in a way, this kind of assumption that, let's say, as 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 if nothing happens, can actually be very eventful if, let's say, if you stop and pay attention to whatever things we tend to assume as simply minuscule or unimportant. So yes, so a very important part of the movie is the setting, but also the very end of the setting, because they finished the drive, they ascend the canyon, and they find more space. This massive, let's say, a piece of landscape that is actually defined by a void rather by a mass. So it becomes, again, it becomes kind of like these different layers of simply meeting, encountering almost nothingness, but within that nothingness there is something going on.
So many different layers of this. It's quite interesting. Who would have thought that that film particularly would be such what's the word, fertile ground for boredom research? I like it. Thank you so much once again for sharing that with us.